Well, we're excited that you guys are here with us at the 9. If I've not had or 11, sorry, still in the 9. My name is Jason. I'm one of the pastors here at Foundation. Our lead pastor, Clint, and his wife, Brooke, recently had their little boy, Wilder. And so they're taking some time together. So you get me today. My apologies. So I don't know about you guys, but and I like have this title around here as kind of being the office Grinch. And it's real. There is nobody even a close second on our staff team. And it's not because I'm like this person that is absent of joy. It's just, I just don't like the holidays sometimes. And I don't know if any other Grinches in the room, maybe we can unite. We'll be at the ice cream truck later, I guess. But I just don't like holidays. And I think I dug into it a little bit this week as to why, because, we're the first Christmas. There's Christmas trees on the graphic. There are Christmas presents outside for all the kids for the Ruthville Christmas Project. And so I did a little bit of digging, a little bit of self-study this week. And honestly, like one of the reasons that I struggle with holidays, because as a kid, I just bounced around a ton. I don't know if any of you guys can relate to this, but my parents got divorced when I was 2, right around there. And so, holidays were just crazy. And my life in general was just crazy. I was raised by committee. I don't know if that's any of you guys, but I was raised by my grandparents, by my mom's 4 sisters, by their husbands, by, kind of my cousins. I was just that kid that was just drug everywhere, right? And so, I was, that's just how my life started. And then you fast forward a little bit and you get to the point where, I get married and I marry into a family that loves their holidays, just like any good Southern family should do. And so I'm in 2 families that love their holidays and all of their holidays are important. So you get where I'm going with that. So there's 2. So we go from one set of holidays that I have to deal with and we multiply that by a whole nother set of holidays that I have to deal with. And then you have kids that you throw into the mix. And especially at Christmas, there's 800 days of dress up stuff at elementary school, right? And there's all these parties and everything. And so you can quickly understand why I default to being a Grinch. I almost wore my Grinch sweatshirt today, but I felt like Christian, and it probably wouldn't look good on the live stream. Christian probably wouldn't be happy with me. But I struggle. And I don't know if any of you are that way. And so I remember in the summer of 2013, leading into the Christmas season of 2013, my mom passed away. And so my mom was that person that I kind of began to take care of in her later years in life. And so for the last 8 to 10 years of her life, I'm making sure that she's at all of these double holidays, right? So I'm having to go 45 minutes from my house to pick her up with all of my little kids with me. And we're going to do this, and it's every holiday. It's not just Christmas. It's not just Thanksgiving. It's Mother's Day, 4th of July, all Flag Day, all the days, right? And so it's just all of these things. But in 2013, when she passed away, there was just this empty feeling. And it's not because my mom loved the holidays, which she did, but it's just I was missing somebody that was a vital part of my holiday experience. I was missing that person. I was without her. And it didn't really hit me hard. It was just kind of this vague feeling, right? It was this extra heaviness that was there. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but maybe some of you are dealing with that potentially right now. I know that for many, this Christmas is the first Christmas without somebody. Just statistically speaking, I know in a room of people this large, I know that there's a significant number of you that are dealing with the crushing blow of losing somebody. Maybe you experienced a death in your immediate family this year. Maybe you buried a parent or a spouse. Maybe you lost a sibling or a friend. Maybe your marriage fell apart. Maybe this was just a year of massive loss that you can't explain. Maybe you, because of this, are battling health issues, or whether they're mental or physical. Maybe you've been a person that's been with people that are going through a lot. You know, the one thing I know about loss is that loss does not discriminate. We all deal with loss. If you live any length of time, you're going to deal with loss. So how do we deal with loss as we go into the Christmas season? You know, just this week, I had the honor of assisting a family that's a part of Foundation with a funeral of their dad and granddad, just days before Thanksgiving, weeks before Christmas. The thing about missing somebody or grieving a loss is that it's incredibly unique. Everybody experiences loss, and everybody goes through grief in their own unique ways. Have you ever felt just stuck while you were grieving? Like you were living life, but everything was kind of in slow motion? Like I remember, like I said, in 2013 when my mom passed away, just this fast-paced thing, but it feels like you're stuck in neutral, right? And I'm having to look to my wife and, hey, I need you, I don't really care what color the casket is. I don't. We need to be able to afford it. So I need you to pick something. So we go through that whole process, and I'm an only child, so you're just kind of dealing with all of those things. And I remember leaving the cemetery, and I turned right out of the parking lot, and there were still people parking their cars at Publix, right? There were still people stuck in the drive-through line at McDonald's waiting for the ice cream machine to work. Life was still happening around my grief. Life was still happening around the loss. And part of me was like, do y'all not know that my mom just died? Y'all need to stop going grocery shopping. You need to stop going to the bank. So how do we live in that? C.S. Lewis, a renowned Christian author, in his book called A Grief Observed, said it this way. And this book is a published journal of his grief processing. He says it this way. No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I am not afraid, but it's the sensation that is like being afraid. The fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning. I keep on swallowing. At other times, it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. There's a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says. Now, today we're going to look at a tough passage of Scripture that is included in the Bible to give us a full context around the birth and early stages of Jesus' life. Today we're going to see a paranoid leader create a situation that would alter generations of families. And when we look at this story, it's not necessarily the most happy story. But I believe that this is a part of everything so that we can see the world that Jesus stepped into. Jesus did not step into a nice, easy, pain-free world. He didn't. He stepped into a chaotic, like just turbulent, ridiculous time in history. And this is shortly after Jesus was born. Most scholars think somewhere between 18 to 24 months after Jesus was born. And this story, we got to read it carefully, but wrapped up in this narrative we're going to look at today is high levels of tense, stress, grief, anxiety, and it's one person's attempt to hang on to their power that was just kind of dangling by a thread. A young Jesus was the source of this angst for someone who already had the label of king. So when we look at this passage today, there's a lot of kind of heavy content. But we're going to do our best to get some of these details in and look at what this looks like for us today. Matthew chapter 2, we're going to start in verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Now we're gonna sit there for a second. We got to talk about the players that we've learned about and the location that we've learned about just from the first few words. After Jesus was born, like I said, we think maybe 15 to 18 to 24 months after he was born. We're not exactly sure, but we get this narrative. We can estimate that age due to some of the details, and there's 4 of them that I'm going to kind of bullet point real quick. The Magi that we see in this passage likely visited Jesus after his birth for 4 to 5 reasons. The first one, we know that it's after the birth because Matthew refers to Jesus as a child in this narrative and not an infant. We know it's not like in that phase, that if you're a parent, that like that weird phase where it's like they're not really a baby, but they're still not like a toddler. So we're in that season of life. We also see that Jesus' family was in a house of some type. Not at the manger, not in a barn, not in an inn, not at a stable. It's not that birth narrative location. We also see that Mary and Joseph, before this, offered the poor person's sacrifice at the temple while dedicating Jesus about 40 days after Jesus was born. They also returned, at the end of this passage, they returned back to that house. So it's just more knowledge that they were in a space, and then they moved from a space, and then they came back to a space. Thank you for letting me be a nerd there. Herod, we learned a little bit about Herod, okay? One scholar says it this way. Herod was not only Idumean in race, a Jew in religion, but he was a heathen in practice and a monster in character. We are dealing with one bad dude right here. We know a ton about Herod from a guy named Josephus. Josephus was an early historian that was connected to that region. We learn a lot from Josephus. There's a lot of really wild stuff. If you have time this week, just Google Josephus and Herod. All sorts of stuff will pop up. Herod was a successful client king, which meant that he was hired by Rome to maintain the peace in the region that he was overseeing. And we think that he reigned from about 40 BC to about 4 BC. He maintained peace between Rome and Judea. Although he ruled with Roman support, he was always deferential to Rome. He rebuilt the Jerusalem temple, founded the port city of Caesarea, and transformed Jerusalem with all sorts of palaces and theaters. He was a monarch. He built fortresses. He was very diplomatic and skilled in ensuring peace between Jerusalem and Rome. And he earned the title Herod the Great because of that. Now, there were things that were going on at home for Herod that weren't great. Okay, so all of this political conquest, all of this power, right? And then at home, Josephus tells us that Herod has 10 wives. Each of those wives have at least one son. And as those boys get older, they're all angling for the kingdom. They're all trying to get on Herod's good side. They're all trying to kind of take it from daddy. So this is what's happening at home. Okay, this is the backdrop for the story. Then we learn about a group of people. Church tradition calls them wise men. This passage calls them magi. Sometimes we know them as kings from the east. Sometimes they're astrologers from the east. But these guys are coming to see what we see in verse 2 as king of the Jews. So verse 2. The magi asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Now, asking that question to Herod is the recipe for a disaster. The phrase King of the Jews in the Gospels is an incredibly important phrase. This is a phrase that would be given to Jesus multiple times in his lifetime. This is a phrase that is big in the Easter narratives, the crucifixion and resurrection narratives. This is a phrase that pops up quite a bit. The star that these guys are following is also very important. Scholars debate like what exactly it was, because that's what scholars do. They debate things. That's what smart people do. But they were following it from the east, desiring to see the one that has been born the King of the Jews. Verse 3. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem was disturbed with him. Verse 4, when he called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Now in verse 3, we see a pretty rare word in Scripture. In our English Bibles, it comes across as the word disturbed. But this idea, both in Hebrew and Greek, is a pretty rare word. This word happens less than 20 times in the Bible. And the meaning of this word gives us a good picture of where Herod's headspace was. The original idea that this carries is an action word that means trouble, throw in confusion, terrify, or be stirred up. Best case scenario, Herod is being stirred up. We kind of know that feeling, right? Mentally, we know that feeling. Emotionally, we know what it feels like to get worked up. This is where Herod's at. Worst case scenario, he's a little bit unhinged at this point. A desperate man that's just a little bit off. He's stressed with everything that's going on at home. The boys are trying to take everything from him. He's got 10 wives that are dealing with these 10 boys, and everything is just kind of crumbling around him. This is the Herod that we see. Historically, we know that Herod the Great has a short fuse. To be someone that makes very rash decisions and is incredibly insecure. He just needed a little bit to throw him off the edge. And that question threw him over the edge. Verse 9. After they had heard the king, they went on their way. This is the Magi. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place the child was. So the Magi had made it to Jesus. And then verses 10 and 11 kind of share with us what happened there. But we're going to jump down to verse 12. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, the Magi returned to their country by another route. Verse 13, when they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child and kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so it was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet. Out of Egypt I will call my son. So we're going to sit here for a second. All of the Herod conversation in this story, in this narrative, all the Herod conversation in this narrative is a precursor to the obedience of Joseph at the end of the passage. Probably around 2 years before this, another angel of the Lord visited Joseph in a dream. Because before Jesus was born, when Joseph found out that Mary was pregnant, he was ready to divorce her in secret. He was maybe a little disturbed, a little torn up on the inside. And so he had this plan to divorce her in secret, which I don't really know if he thought through that plan because it's really hard to divorce anybody in secret, but that's kind of where he was. And an angel of the Lord said, hey Joseph, this baby that is growing inside of Mary is going to be the Savior of the world. Essentially, hey man, like God is trusting you to be the earthly father of somebody that is going to change the world. And then Joseph at that point is like, all right, okay, I'm a little scary, but okay. And so the next time an angel comes to him, he's like, yes, sir. And he gets up and he takes little baby Jesus, like little 18-month-old Jesus and Mary to Egypt. Now, it's not just like a little short drive down the road to Moreland. This is a journey with a baby, okay? They didn't have car seats. They didn't have TVs. They didn't have iPads. They are going to Egypt. And the scripture tells us that he takes off like at night. As soon as he hears this dream, it's almost immediate. As soon as this dream is there, he goes. He wakes up Mary and says, let's go. We got to take the baby. We got to go. He doesn't ask any questions. He doesn't really know what's happening. He's not involved like with any of the stuff with Herod. He just knows because of what the angel tells him. Now, some scholars think that it's between 75 and 150 miles from where they were in Bethlehem. That's a long way. 75 to 150 miles. Some people even argue that it was further into Egypt, upwards of 250 to 300 miles away. I don't know how they know that. Remember, scholars are just nerds that argue. And so, that's a long way. And they're there headed there while this is happening. Verse 16. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious and gave orders to kill all of the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and younger, in accordance with the time that he learned from the Magi. So this is when Herod loses any semblance of sanity. He goes from disturbed to flat-out monster, killing babies. Now, people debate, again, what is going on here. But in that day, the population of Bethlehem was somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people. Small town, pretty insignificant town until Jesus was born. And so the math gives us somewhere between 15 to 24 baby boys that were murdered because Herod was insecure and after Jesus. Now, there's a complication with this because Josephus, the guy I told you about, in his history of Herod, he doesn't even mention this, right? It doesn't even get a footnote in the book, which is wild because there's so much craziness that Herod did, and this doesn't even get a footnote. The only time we see it is in Matthew here. But we know that there's other parts of the Bible that are not squared by not having historical, explanation or references. And a lot of people think that it doesn't show up with Josephus for two reasons. The first reason is simple. It's because it was in Bethlehem, and it was such a small place that a lot of inconsequential things were happening there. Herod had a lot of other things to deal with, and it was just a little tiny outpost. So things that were happening there weren't as important as things that were happening in the big city of Jerusalem. And the second piece of that is that it wasn't one of the worst things that Herod ever did. It's just mind-boggling to me. That is wild, how killing up to 24 kids-ish, just because he was insecure and just because he was scared of a little baby boy that was called the King of the Jews by 3 or 4 guys from another country, and he just kills him. Now, I can't imagine the chaos. I mean, we don't have it in the Bible. All we have is when Herod realized that he had been outwitted and outsmarted, he was furious and gave the guys an order to go kill all the boys in Bethlehem. We don't know how long it took. We don't know a lot of specific details, but I don't know about you, but I've had a 15 to 24-month-old baby boy in my arms. I have 2 of them. And I can imagine the chaos that if somebody ripped into my house and ripped my baby boy out of my arms to kill him, you can imagine the scene. And this is happening at multiple houses, all because of the insecurity and the unhinged nature of a crazy, crazy king. Imagine the chaos. Imagine the mourning. Imagine the loss. Imagine that first Christmas that you didn't even know was the first Christmas without your baby boy because of a king that wanted to eliminate all threats. Imagine the grief. And the reality of this doesn't sink in at first glance for us because honestly, it's not our story. It's not 2024 United States, Western Hemisphere thinking mindset. This is not our story. And you're probably thinking, man, like Jason, this doesn't matter to me because it's not my story. I think it's part of your story. Here's why. In all of the chaos, in all of the struggle, in all of the death and mourning and funerals and generations that were stopped and family lines that were crushed, in the middle of all of that, Jesus survived it. Jesus survived it because his dad was obedient. Jesus survived it. This little silver lining of hope paves the way for what Christmas is really all about. Joseph made sure that Jesus survived the slaughter and was able to fulfill his purpose as the King of Kings, not just the King of the Jews. Jesus is still Emmanuel, God with us. You know, and the Christmas narratives are not without loss. The Christmas, like what we've done in our culture today, is we've kind of sanitized the Christmas story. We've kind of sanitized the Christmas story so we can sit around in our homes on Christmas Eve and eat cookies and drink hot chocolate and read Luke chapter 2. But remember, Jesus stepped into a world, he was born into a world of chaos, of loss, of people that are experiencing their first Christmas without. These people are not without mourning or pain. They know all about that. And we don't have the words in the narrative, but we know they experienced it. And honestly, that mirrors our life. The struggle that those moms and dads were facing, that mirrors our lives, honestly. Because we have happiness and we have heartache. We have joy and we have pain. We have success. We have failure. We have stretches in our lives that make absolutely no sense. And then we have great stretches in our lives that make absolutely no sense. The only thing that makes it make sense is Emmanuel, God with us. And we sit in the middle of that tension right now. And if we're honest with ourselves, half of us are probably dealing with something or someone that is missing and we feel stuck in the morning. We feel stuck. That's how life is. It's a mixture of chaos and calm and everything in between. And maybe you don't have a Herod in your life, but I know that you have battles that you're facing. You know, the global church, the Big C church, has celebrated this passage of Scripture for centuries. They've honored the lives of these innocent kids who died at the hands of a corrupt king that was trying to kill the King of Kings. This celebration is called the Feast of the Holy Innocents. And it's celebrated by many Christian denominations on a yearly basis. And it's celebrating these 15 to 24 babies that died here in Matthew chapter 2. But why? Why do we remember that loss? Why would we desire to remember and honor the lives of the kids that were killed in this tragedy? Why do we do that? I think it's simple, honestly. When we mourn together, when we mourn together, when we remember together, we are all changed together. I think the early church got this right. Sounds crazy to say, but I think the early church got this right because here's how I know that is because Jesus had something to say about it too. In Matthew chapter 5, just a few pages over from where we're at this morning, he says these words: "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." You know, this phrase doesn't seem to make much sense, like happy or the unhappy, happy or the brokenhearted, happy or the broken. I don't know about you guys, but in my weak moments, in my breaking point moments, in my without moments, I don't feel happy. But again, Jesus is not about our happiness. Jesus is about helping us make joy a habit so that love can be a reflex. Let's look at this one in the Message to help it make a little bit more sense. You're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you. The church planner Paul also taught this in his churches, and in Romans 12:15, we get a cool picture of this. Paul says it this way: rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. You know, in ancient cultures, mourning was a season, so to speak. In those cultures, it was much more than just you get a call from family at the hospital, and then you rush to be there, and then there's like the viewing, and then, you know, there's the funeral, and then there's the cemetery, and then there's eating fried chicken afterwards. It was much, much more than that. It was a season. They lived these passages out. This warning that Paul is giving, this encouragement that Paul is giving, it's double-sided. He's like, man, mourn with those who mourn, but man, rejoice with those who rejoice. Let's kick it up a notch, right? And if you didn't have the people to help you in that season, if you had a small family, or you didn't have enough people around you in your village, you could like pay people to come and mourn with you. It's in the Bible. There's plenty of other extra biblical stuff that talks about that. You could pay people to come and sit with you to mourn your loss. Paul's challenge here is the same one that I want to give you today. Mourn with those who mourn. Rejoice with those who rejoice. There's something about having a village that's there with you to rejoice when you're rejoicing and to mourn when you mourn. It doesn't remove the loss. It doesn't. It just gives you somebody to experience it with. And I think that's better than the removal of the loss. Having been somebody that's been through a lot of loss, I love my people around me when I'm mourning. You know, we're going to wrap our gathering today, here in a minute, with a historic Christmas song that speaks to some of the tension that we sit in today. God Rest You Merry Gentlemen is a song that goes back to the 1500s. But over time, there's some meanings in this old hymn that have changed a bit. And before we sing them, I want to help us get back to those meanings. The comma in the title of the song has gotten slid over a word. It's always God rest ye, comma, merry gentlemen. It's not that. It's God rest ye, merry, comma, gentlemen. Also, the word rest, as intended in the song, is a verb that means something different than what we use the word rest for today. In the 16th and 17th hundreds, it meant this: to keep, to cause, to continue, to remain. It was a verb. It was an action word. It was a purposeful rest. It wasn't like lay on the sofa, veg out, watch Netflix all day kind of rest. So when we fix the definitions there, this is what we get. God rest you merry equals God grant you peace and happiness. And if you dig into the lyrics a little bit more, we're going to repeat the phrase over and over again: tidings of comfort and joy. Now, if everything was supposed to be happy, why would we be singing about comfort? News of comfort and joy. That's what this is about. News of comfort through Jesus. We now have hope of comfort when we are without joy and when we're in the mourning season. Maybe that's why I don't like holidays. Maybe because we don't know what they're about. Maybe this is what Christmas is about: comfort and joy. Well, why do we need comfort? Because life brings chaos. Because life brings grief. And we need somebody to sit on the floor with us in our tears to build us back up. The path to joy is through trust in Jesus. And the more we trust Jesus, the more joy becomes a habit. The more joy is a habit, the more we love other people. We tend to focus on what we are living without instead of who we are living with. We tend to focus on what we are living without instead of who we will always be with. Remember the promise of Jesus as Emmanuel, God with us. If Jesus is with us, and even though we're without our loved ones or without our spouses or without our parents or without fill in the blank, we are always with Jesus. And it's gonna take a little while to feel that, but it's a promise.